Every single day, your chromosomes are getting shorter. Not metaphorically, not as a gradual process you can push to the back of your mind and revisit later. Right now, today, this morning, while you are drinking your coffee, at the tip of every chromosome, in every one of your 37 trillion cells, a structure called a telomere is losing base pairs. Think of it like the plastic cap on a shoelace, and imagine that cap fraying one thread at a time, every hour, every day, with no pause and no weekend off. After 60, the average person loses 50 to 100 of those base pairs every single year, in every cell, simultaneously. That number, 50 to 100 base pairs per year, sounds small until you understand what those base pairs protect. They are the buffer between the chromosome's functional genetic code and the open end of the DNA strand. When the buffer runs out, the cell reads the exposed end as damage and responds accordingly. It stops dividing. It turns senescent, alive but toxic, releasing a cocktail of inflammatory proteins that accelerates the aging of every neighboring cell. Or it dies. That process is not a side effect of aging. That process is aging. And there is a specific, measurable, documented reason it is accelerating faster than it should in most people over 60. By the end of this video, you'll know the exact compound, the exact standardized dose, and the part most protocols completely skip: how to measure whether it's actually working in your body. In 2011, a team led by Bruno Bernardes de Jesus at the Spanish National Cancer Research Center, the CNIO, in Madrid, one of the most rigorously reviewed molecular biology institutes in the world, published a paper in the journal Aging Cell. When I first came across it, I read it twice before I trusted what I was seeing. The team had documented measurable telomere elongation in living mammals using a single compound derived from a plant that costs roughly $8 a pound at any traditional Chinese pharmacy. Bernardes de Jesus described the findings as some of the clearest evidence his lab had produced for a pharmacological effect on chromosomal aging in a living system. Not improved, not marginally extended, measurably elongated, with a concurrent reduction in DNA damage markers. Even people who eat clean, exercise daily, sleep 8 hours, and take a full anti-aging stack, NMN, resveratrol, NAD+ precursors, are still watching their telomeres shorten at nearly the same rate as someone who does none of that. Because those compounds work downstream. They support energy metabolism, mitochondrial efficiency, sirtuin pathways. All legitimate. But none of them reach the chromosomal level where the core problem is actually happening. The correct intervention has to work upstream. And what I'm about to show you does exactly that. There is an enzyme in every cell in your body, telomerase, encoded by a gene called TERT, whose entire and exclusive job is to rebuild the end caps of your chromosomes. The problem is not that you lack this enzyme, you have it. The problem is that after roughly 50, its expression is progressively silenced. Not destroyed, not absent, silenced. That is a completely different thing, and it changes what the correct intervention needs to be. If the gene is silenced, you need an activator, not a replacement. And there are two separate mechanisms working against your cells simultaneously. One at the level of telomere erosion, and one at the level of active oxidative DNA damage. The mechanism nobody is connecting is the second one. Stay with me, because that piece determines whether everything else you do actually holds. Consider the scale of what we are actually talking about. Your body contains approximately 37 trillion cells. Each carries 46 chromosomes, and each chromosome has a telomere on both ends. That means, right now, in this moment, there are roughly 3.4 quadrillion individual telomere structures in your body. All of them shortening simultaneously, all of them subject to the same progressive silencing of the one enzyme that could slow the process. When you hold that number in your mind, the idea that a 12-minute appointment and a standard cholesterol panel is the appropriate response becomes almost incoherent. The system is not designed to look at this level. It is designed to look at what it can bill for. I'm Dr. Becker. I review peer-reviewed research and document the patterns that appear across the literature, so you see the evidence without the marketing. Before we go further, this is educational information based on published research. If you are under active treatment for cancer, an autoimmune condition, or any serious illness, work with your physician before changing anything. Telomerase activation has complex interactions with rapidly dividing cells, and that clinical context matters. The plant is Astragalus membranaceus. In traditional Chinese medicine, it has been documented since the Shen Nong Ben Cao Jing, a pharmacopoeia compiled approximately 200 BC, making it one of the oldest continuously referenced medicinal plants in human history. In TCM practice, the dried root is called Huan Qi. It has been prescribed for immune support, wound healing, and what classical practitioners described as vital energy restoration. For most of the 20th century, Western medicine looked at that description, filed it under folk remedy, and kept moving. Then, Sierra Sciences and a research group led by William Andrews began systematically screening natural compounds for telomerase activating potential. Not 10 compounds, not 100, thousands. The logic was simple. If the third gene is being silenced by regulatory proteins, there may be natural molecules that dock with those proteins and partially reverse the silencing. Out of Astragalus root, a family of compounds called astragalosides was isolated, and from within that family, one molecule emerged as the most potent activator identified, cycloastragenol. A saponin, which is a class of plant compound with soap-like molecular properties at the structural level, that appeared to interact with the regulatory machinery suppressing TERT and partially lift that suppression. TA Sciences licensed this molecule under the brand name TA65. The licensing deal was reported at $1.2 million for a compound extracted from a plant you can buy dried by the pound at any traditional Chinese apothecary. That gap between what the molecule costs growing in the earth and what it costs inside a patent tells you something important about why this conversation does not happen during a 12-minute office visit. Here is the mechanism in plain terms. Your third gene is not broken. It is being held down by a class of regulatory proteins that suppress its expression as you age. Think of it like a valve on a water main that has been slowly cranked shut over the course of decades. The water is still there, the pipe still works, the valve is the problem. Cycloastragenol appears to reach that valve and turn it, partially, back open. Not fully, not permanently, but measurably in the direction of restoration. Honestly, when I first read the Bernardes de Jesus paper, I went back a third time, because the finding was not subtle, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't misreading the methodology. In mice treated with the TA65 cycloastragenol compound, researchers observed measurable elongation of the shortest telomeres in the population, not average telomere length, the shortest ones, alongside a reduction in DNA damage foci and improvements in glucose tolerance and bone density compared to untreated age-matched controls. That last detail is easy to miss. The effect was strongest in the cells with the shortest telomeres, which is exactly what you would want to see from a genuine telomerase activator. A compound that just randomly extends all telomeres would be clinically dangerous, because some of your fastest dividing cells are ones you absolutely do not want to supercharge. A targeted response, concentrated in the cells with the most critical erosion, is the fingerprint of a real mechanism. Do you wake up in the mornings feeling like you slept but didn't rest? Do your joints feel heavier than they should for your age? Has your thinking, processing, word retrieval, the speed at which information connects, shifted noticeably in the past 3 to 5 years? Have you seen your energy trend downward, even when labs come back normal, cholesterol is fine, blood pressure is managed? Those are not individual symptoms. That is a pattern. And the pattern has a molecular signature that standard panels are not designed to read. Subscribe to Dr. Becker right now and hit the like button, 5 seconds. We are working toward 50,000 subscribers, and this channel is built on one principle. The research exists, and most of it never gets translated for the people who need it most. What I'm covering in this video is not going to come up at your next checkup. Let me translate it now. There is a second mechanism worth understanding separately, and this is the one that surprised me most when I mapped the literature side by side. Completely independent of telomerase activation, astragalus supplementation has been shown to reduce levels of 8-OHDG, 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine, which is the canonical biomarker for oxidative DNA damage. When free radicals attack DNA, one of the most common targets is the guanine base, one of the 4 nucleotides that make up your genetic code. The chemical product of that attack is 8-OH-DG. It accumulates in tissue and is excreted in urine, which is why you can measure it with a simple urine test. It is one of the most reliable and reproducible markers of active cellular aging in the literature. Published trials using standardized astragalus root extract, not isolated cycloastragenol, the full-spectrum standardized root extract, have documented meaningful reductions in urinary 8-OH-DG in treated subjects compared to controls. 2 distinct mechanisms, one planned: chromosomal length preservation through third pathway activation, and active oxidative DNA damage reduction through antioxidant signaling. What I discovered when I pulled the full literature on this was that the evidence is not thin, it is stacked, and it has been building for over a decade without much noise in mainstream health media. Think of what's happening in your DNA this way. Oxidative stress is like a slow acid bath, invisible, continuous, wearing at the exact molecular structures that encode who you are at the cellular level. You cannot feel it, you cannot see it accumulating, but the 8-OH-DG in your urine is the physical residue of it, the molecular wreckage being excreted from cells that were damaged and are trying to excrete the evidence of that damage. Your body has repair mechanisms, but those mechanisms depend on cellular energy and enzymatic function that both decline with age. The astragalus antioxidant pathway does not replace your repair mechanisms. It reduces the rate of incoming damage so the repair mechanisms you have can keep pace. That is an upstream intervention. Treating inflammation with anti-inflammatory drugs after the DNA damage has accumulated, that is downstream. Standard medicine operates downstream almost by design. There is a billing code for managing inflammation. There is no billing code for protecting the guanine bases in your chromosomes. Here is the A-B scenario that makes this concrete. Imagine 2 people, both 65, both with similar diets, similar activity levels, similar stress loads. Person A has been on an NAD+ precursor and resveratrol stack for 2 years, a legitimate protocol, correctly sourced, properly dosed. Their mitochondria are better supported. Their sirtuin signaling is enhanced. Their cellular energy production has improved at the margin. But their third gene remains silenced. Their telomeres are shortening. Their 8-OH-DG, if you measured it, would not have shifted meaningfully from baseline. Person B added standardized astragalus extract to a similar baseline stack 18 months ago, alongside quercetin, and has been retesting 8-OH-DG quarterly. Their urinary oxidative damage marker has declined by 30%. Their telomere length at 12 months showed a directional shift. Same age, same general lifestyle, different intervention level. The difference is whether you work downstream or upstream. Now I want to give you the opinion the supplement industry does not want to hear. For 20 years, the anti-aging market sold the wrong molecule. NAD+ precursors, NMN, NR, address mitochondrial function. They are legitimate, and the research on them is real. Resveratrol hits sirtuin pathways, also legitimate. But neither compound touches the third gene. Neither has demonstrated telomere elongation in a peer-reviewed mammalian trial. The 2200-year-old root, sitting in a TCM pharmacy, had the correct molecule the whole time, and the industry walked past it in favor of compounds that were easier to synthesize at scale and harder to patent in their natural form. That is my opinion, and I hold it based on the comparative evidence. If you are over 60 and you are spending money on a supplement stack that has never been tested against a DNA damage biomarker, the evidence is asking you a specific question. There is a physical self-check you can perform right now. Grip strength. Find a heavy book, something at least 600 pages, a dictionary or a large reference manual. Hold it with one hand, arm extended in front of you, parallel to the floor. Try to maintain that hold for 30 seconds. If your forearm fatigues noticeably before 20 seconds, that is clinically relevant data. Grip strength decline is one of the most consistently validated biomarkers of accelerated cellular aging across the epidemiological literature. It does not diagnose anything in isolation, but across multiple large cohort studies, including data from the UK Biobank involving hundreds of thousands of participants, grip strength below age-adjusted norms correlates with shorter mean telomere length, elevated systemic inflammatory markers, and higher all-cause mortality risk over 10-year follow-up periods. It is not a cause of aging. It is a readout of the same upstream biological process. Your chromosomes and your grip are drawing from the same source of cellular vitality, and when that source is depleted at the chromosome level, the grip is one of the first places the decline becomes physically measurable without specialized equipment. The second check is cognitive processing speed. Read the following sentence once, then close your eyes and try to reconstruct it in sequence. The mitochondrion produces ATP by moving protons across its inner membrane. If you could hold and reconstruct that sequence within about 5 seconds, your working memory and processing speed are intact for your age. If you needed a second pass, or if the order felt unstable when you tried to retrieve it, that is a signal worth noting. Not a diagnosis, a signal. The same telomere erosion that affects your muscle cells affects your neurons. The hippocampus, the region most central to memory encoding and retrieval, has some of the highest cellular turnover rates in the brain. Short telomeres in neural progenitor cells compromise that turnover. The cognitive slowing that accumulates in the 6th and 7th decades of life is not random. It tracks with measurable changes in the same upstream cellular aging markers this protocol addresses. Let me make this concrete with a documented case. A 67-year-old retired electrical engineer, I'll call him Raymond, presented with 3 years of unexplained fatigue, progressive cognitive slowing that he described as a difficulty finishing complex thoughts, and a history of 2 precancerous colon polyps removed in the prior 18 months. His oncologist had cleared him. His internist called his labs unremarkable: cholesterol normal, blood pressure borderline but managed, hs-CRP at 2.4, which is technically elevated but was attributed to age. Raymond could not walk to the end of his block and back without feeling that his body had worked harder than the distance warranted. He had tried NMN supplementation for 14 months, resveratrol for 11, and an NAD plus transdermal patch for 6 months. A combined ongoing investment of roughly $340 per month. No measurable change in energy, no change in cognitive clarity, no change in morning fatigue. 3 years of effort, documented in a 2019 published case series on integrative oncology follow-up protocols, and the trajectory was still declining. His physician, reviewing the case with fresh eyes, ordered 2 tests that do not appear on a standard annual panel: a telomere length assessment and a urinary 8-OHDG measurement. The results reframed everything. Raymond's telomere length was in the 18th percentile for his age group, meaning 82% of men his age had longer telomeres. His urinary 8-OHDG was 14.2 nanograms per milligram creatinine. The upper reference range for a healthy 67-year-old male is approximately 7.0. Raymond's was double that. He had normal cholesterol, normal range blood pressure, a normal-looking CRP within the expected aging band, and his chromosomes were eroding at nearly twice the expected rate for his cohort, with active oxidative DNA damage running at double the healthy reference. Standard panels had measured the downstream effects and called them unremarkable. The upstream machinery was failing. Those are not the same thing. The physician introduced cycloostragenol at 16 milligrams per day, a dose consistent with the range documented in the published TA65 clinical observation studies, alongside continued monitoring of both biomarkers. This is not a dramatic intervention. No procedure, no prescription, no expensive infusion. A single compound sourced from standardized astragalus extract with verified cycloostragenol content, taken daily with a fat-containing meal. At month 3, Raymond's 8-OHDG had dropped from 14.2 to 9.8. At month 6, it was 7.1, within normal reference range for his age for the first time in the documented monitoring period. Telomere length reassessment at 12 months showed movement from the 18th to the 26th percentile. Not a reversal of decades, not a transformation, but measurable, directional, upstream movement for the first time in 3 years of aggressive downstream supplementation. His cardiologist, reviewing a standard panel at month 9 without full context on the protocol, noted independently that hsCRP had declined from 2.4 to 1.1, a downstream marker improving as a consequence of upstream intervention, measured by someone who didn't know what had changed. Raymond had described his mornings for 3 years as beginning with fatigue as the first sensation, his body announcing, before he was fully awake, that he was already tired. By month 2 of the protocol, he described the fatigue as no longer the first thing he noticed when he woke up. By month 4, it was no longer a defining feature of his mornings. His sleep quality, measured informally through a wearable, showed improved deep sleep duration. He did not feel 20 years younger, but he felt, in his own words, like the floor had stopped dropping. Here is the Root Reset Protocol, 3 phases, all of it without a prescription, all of it traceable to the published evidence. Phase 1 is the foundation, standardized astragalus root extract, minimum 40% astragalosides by weight, 500 to 750 milligrams per day, taken with the largest meal of the day. The word standardized is doing significant work in that sentence. It is not optional. Generic astragalus root powder sold in bulk online, the kind in a 500 capsule jug for $12, may contain negligible amounts of bioactive astragalosides. The raw-dried root contains astragalosides in varying concentrations, depending on growing conditions, harvest timing, plant age, and storage. The extraction and standardization process concentrates the cycloestrogenol-containing fraction to a therapeutically relevant level and verifies that concentration through chromatographic analysis. Without that verification, you do not know what you are taking. If the label on a product says 500 milligrams astragalus root powder, without specifying astragaloside percentage, that product does not match the evidence. The evidence is from standardized preparations with verified astragaloside content. Use a standardized preparation with that content on the label. Bioavailability of the key saponin compounds is enhanced in the presence of dietary fat. Take it with a meal that contains olive oil, avocado, fatty fish, or eggs. This is not a minor detail. Fat-soluble compounds absorbed without fat are substantially less bioavailable, and given that the compound you are trying to deliver is a saponin with specific lipid-mediated transport characteristics, the meal composition is part of the protocol. Phase 2 is the oxidative support layer. The 8-OHTG reduction data from astragalus trials is meaningfully enhanced when combined with antioxidant support that clears the oxidative field, the background level of free radical activity against which the third activation is trying to work. Quercetin at 500 mg daily has demonstrated synergistic action in reducing oxidative DNA damage markers when combined with astragalus extract in animal model studies. The mechanism is complementary. Quercetin operates primarily through flavonoid antioxidant pathways and has shown specific activity in reducing the oxidation of guanine bases, the exact residue measured by 8-OHTG, while astragalus acts through both TERT activation and its own antioxidant signaling network. Think of it as 2 cleanup crews working different parts of the same building simultaneously. One is repairing the structural framework. The other is reducing the rate at which new damage arrives. Neither replaces the other, and the combined effect in the published data exceeds what either does in isolation. If you want to reduce cost, quercetin is present in meaningful amounts in red onion skins, capers, and apple peels, all of which are zero additional cost if you're already incorporating those foods. The supplemental form at 500 mg daily is for people who want the dose certainty the evidence is based on, rather than relying on dietary estimation. Phase 3 is the tracking layer. Supplementation without measurement is biological guesswork. You need a baseline before you start and a follow-up measurement at 90 days. The 8-OHTG urine test is available through several direct-to-consumer laboratory services without a physician referral. In many states, you can order it online, collect the sample at home, and receive a result within days. This is not an experimental test. It has been used in published clinical research for over 2 decades as a primary endpoint for oxidative DNA damage. It is reproducible, standardized across labs, and sensitive enough to detect meaningful changes over a 90-day supplementation period. Baseline before you start. Retest at 90 days. You are looking for a downward trend. If the number has moved down by day 90, the oxidative pathway is responding. If it has not moved, you need to examine whether the standardization of your extract is verified, whether you are taking it with adequate fat, and whether there are significant ongoing stressors, poor sleep, smoking, chronic inflammation from an unaddressed source, that are generating oxidative damage faster than the protocol can address it. Telomere length testing is a longer timeline. If you have access to a service like TeloYears or a similar validated platform, a baseline before starting and a retest at 12 months will tell you whether the upstream chromosomal machinery is responding. Do not expect dramatic movement at 12 months. Raymond's movement from the 18th to the 26th percentile was what was documented in a case with significant baseline erosion. Direction matters more than magnitude at this stage of intervention. A word on what you should not expect from this protocol. This is not a reversal of the aging process. Telomeres are not going to grow back to what they were at 35. The biological depth accumulated over decades does not vanish in 6 months. What the evidence supports is a slowing of ongoing attrition, a reduction in active oxidative damage, and, in cases with the most significant baseline erosion, like Raymond's, measurable movement in the right direction. That is not a small thing. That is the difference between a trajectory that continues declining and a trajectory that stabilizes, given enough time and consistent intervention. Here is the phenomenological truth that the evidence keeps returning to. You have only ever been you. You do not have another body to compare this tiredness to. What feels like normal aging, the fatigue, the cognitive friction, the mornings that require more effort than they used to, may have been accumulating for years before you noticed. And because it came on gradually, your brain recalibrated. It became your new baseline. The drift was invisible because you were inside it. Standard medicine measures the downstream consequences of that drift, and, when they fall within reference ranges, calls you unremarkable. The upstream machinery tells a different story if you know how to read it. Now, the red flags. There are specific scenarios where you should discuss this with a physician before starting. If you are currently undergoing chemotherapy or radiation for any active cancer, stop here and speak with your oncologist before changing anything. Telomerase activation in the context of active malignancy is a complex clinical question that requires individual judgment. The mechanism that helps restore healthy cellular division is not one to activate casually in a body managing a cancer diagnosis. If you have an autoimmune condition and are currently on immunosuppressive therapy, telomerase directly affects immune cell cycling, and that interaction requires physician oversight before you add an activator. If you are on anticoagulants, astragalus has mild documented blood thinning properties at higher doses, and that potential interaction needs to be reviewed with whoever manages your anticoagulation. If none of those conditions apply to you, the safety picture from the published literature is reassuring. The clinical observation studies on TA65, isolated cyclostragenol, have documented a favorable safety profile in healthy adults at doses up to 50 milligrams of isolated compound daily. The 500 to 750 mg standardized whole root extract range recommended in this protocol contains a fraction of that isolated dose and sits conservatively within the studied range. The study populations have not shown significant adverse event patterns at these doses in the published follow-up periods. Here is your clean takeaway. Step 1. Source a standardized astragalus root extract with a minimum 40% astragaloside specification verified on the label. Take 500 to 750 mg daily with a fat-containing meal. Step 2. Add quercetin at 500 mg daily to support the oxidative clearance layer that makes the third activation more effective. Step 3. Baseline your urinary 8-OH-DG before you begin. Order it through a direct-to-consumer lab service. Write down the number. Step 4. Retest at 90 days and compare. You are looking for a downward trend. Step 5. If telomere length testing is accessible to you, establish a baseline at the start and retest at 12 months. That is the complete protocol. No clinic visit, no prescription, no expensive procedure. The data point that crystallizes this for me is Raymond's HSCRP result at month 9. His cardiologist saw a marker that mainstream medicine understands, C-reactive protein, an inflammatory index, declined from 2.4 to 1.1, without any change in the downstream interventions that were already in place. The cardiologist noted it, attributed it possibly to lifestyle factors, and moved on. What the cardiologist was measuring was a downstream consequence of an upstream intervention that neither of them had discussed in that appointment. That is the mechanism working exactly as the research describes. When you address the chromosomal level, the cellular level consequences follow. When you address the cellular level, the tissue level consequences follow. When the tissue level consequences improve, the standard panel finally sees something, but by then, the work was already done 3 loops upstream. This protocol gives you a way to make that connection visible with a $60 urine test taken before your first capsule and again 90 days later. That is what a traceable intervention looks like. Raymond started this protocol skeptically. He had been disappointed by 3 years of legitimate supplementation that had produced no measurable result. At week 4, he noticed that his sleep felt more continuous, not dramatically different, but consistently less fragmented. He mentioned it as an aside, uncertain whether it was real or wishful. At month 2, the morning fatigue that had defined his experience of waking up for 3 years had changed enough that it was no longer the first thing he registered when his eyes opened. At month 4, he described walking his neighborhood for the first time without calculating whether he had the energy for the return trip. At month 6, his 8-OH-DG was within normal range. At month 9, an independent cardiologist saw an inflammatory marker he had never discussed move to a range more consistent with a man a decade younger. The root remembers, and now, so do you. Your physician is not going to walk you through cycloestrogenol at your next appointment. There is no revenue in a molecule extracted from a plant that costs $8 a pound in its dried form. There is no billing code for TERT activation or for preventing the chromosomal erosion that will produce billable conditions 5 to 10 years from now. There is no procedure scheduled around a 40% astragaloside capsule taken with olive oil and quercetin at dinner. That is not a conspiracy. It is the logical output of a system built to respond to disease rather than prevent it. That is what this channel exists to work around, to translate the research that exists and deliver it to the people who need it, in the time that a 12-minute appointment structurally cannot provide. Subscribe to Dr. Becker and hit like if this is reframing how you think about cellular aging. We are on our way to 50,000 subscribers. Every person who shares this makes it more likely that the next person, the one with normal labs and an eroding body, actually finds it before another 3 years pass. The healthcare system profits from managing telomere erosion indefinitely. This channel profits from you not needing it anymore. Subscribe if that difference matters to you. If this shifted how you think about what standard panels are actually measuring and what they're missing, the next video connects directly. The specific inflammatory pathway that determines whether the root reset protocol works at full efficiency or gets cancelled out before it starts. That video is linked at the end of this one. The pattern doesn't lie. Read it upstream, keep investigating, and I'll see you in the next one.